Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining this critical discussion on gender-based violence in digital space. So, focusing on addressing online harassment, cyberbullying, and the impact of social media on gender-based violence. Introducing myself, I'm Diniti, and I'm honored to moderate the session today. And it is my privilege to introduce our facilitator to you all. So, we have Ms. Sharani Patapadige, who brings an impressive array of achievements and expertise to this conversation. Bringing a little bit of an intro about Ms. Sharani. Ms. Sharani is an acting research analyst and research assistant at the Institute of National Security Studies, Ministry of Defense, Sri Lanka. She topped her class in master's program in conflict peace studies at the University of Colombo. She also holds a Bachelor's of Law degree from General Sir John Kothawala Defense University and also studied deeply the topic of transitional justice from the Bandaranayake Center for International Studies. Now, Ms. Sharani has an extensive background in research and advocacy, contributing to numerous national and international forums. Notably, she has been fully funded fellow of the CADE International Governance and Digital Rights Fellowship Program, where she explored strategies to address issues like online harassment and misuse of digital platforms. She also has published numerous papers and has been recognized for her work, winning the best paper presentation at the first international conference on business sustainability. So before we start the session, I just want to welcome Ms. Sharani to this session. Welcome, Ms. Sharani.
Hi.
Okay. Hi. So, yeah, before we start, I just want to point out one thing to our audience here. Please note that the views shared by Ms. Sharani during this session are her own and do not represent any institution. So today's agenda for this session will follow a presentation by Ms. Sharani and we have a Q&A session on focusing on topics of digital literacy and governance gaps, and a very interactive Q&A with our audience. Without further ado, I welcome Ms. Sharani to share her insights.
Okay, perfect. Nelum, I need your assistance in sharing the screen, and thank you, Amma, for Dimiti for introducing me. So kind, and thank you for bearing with me. We are having this technological failures due to weather.
Perfect.
Okay, perfect. Okay, everyone. So today I'll be discussing on gender-based violence in digital spaces. So let us look at what gender-based violence in digital spaces is. Before that, I would like to give some ideas in terminology. Can we go up with this next slide, please? Next slide, please. Okay, perfect. So when it comes to gender-based violence, we often see sex and gender are looked in similar terms, but in fact, it's extremely different. What sex is, how you're born, it's the biological trait, whether you are a male or a female. But what gender is, how you perceive yourself. It can be, you might perceive yourself as a male, likewise. However, gender-based violence, as we know, is violence that is happening for individuals based on their gender, including physical, sexual, emotional, and psychological harm. Digital gender-based violence, sometimes it is also known as tech-based gender-based violence, is violence that is directed at an individual based on their gender, including physical, emotional, psychological harm. So when we look at digital gender-based violence, we often see it in Sri Lankan context. It's not nothing new. We recently saw a deep fake known to be circulating. We see how unconsensual porn is being disseminated and intimate images taken out and debated, discussed. So it's important to look why is this happening in countries, and it's also a common phenomenon in Sri Lanka. Moving on to the next slide. when we look at this situation, let's see the trends and patterns. Next slide, please. I don't see the slide. Diniti, do you see the slides?
No, I think Nelum's connection just went off and she just came
I
back,
think
I
host
think.
connection went off, right?
Yeah, the connection is a bit weak today.
Yeah, because it's raining, yes.
Yeah, yeah. Audience, please bear with us until
Yes, please. Okay, I'll continue. Even though the slides are not, it's okay. So
yeah, that's
when we look at
perfect.
the context, let's go to the third slide, please. As I told, sex and gender are sometimes used interchangeably, which is a wrong phenomenon. As in the next slide, we saw the situation why Sri Lanka is prevalent. As I mentioned, few incidences. Shall we move on to the next slide, please? So in the next slide, you will see what is physical gender based violence. This is a type of violence that you often see. It can be street harassment, where are you going, what are you doing, likewise. And it can be workplace harassment because you are cornered due to being a woman, and sometimes you are asked to take notes if you are a woman, or you are asked to lead the team because you are a man, you are asked not to vent because you are a man, likewise. So needless to say, this online gender based violence happens in many ways, not the single ways. I have listed it down. It can be cyber harassment, revenge porn, misinformation, disinformation, trafficking, and astroturfing, likewise. So when you look at those plethora of elements that I have listed in the screen, it is something is very clear. All of them have happens online, and also most of this gender-based violence straight in the digital platforms are not consensual. That means you are not wanting it to happen. You don't have whatso control over. So what is this situation? Earlier, when you're walking on the road, a person might have told, where are you going? But now this is happening in digital space, which you have no control over. You might ask to take down the post, report it, likewise, but it will take some time. So the digital footprint will continue. Okay, moving on to the next slide. Now I'm going to showcase another important phenomenon, that is tech facilitated gender based violence. As you can see in the screen, that is utilizing digital tools and technologies such as social media, maybe Facebook, WhatsApp, Viber, likewise to do that. Like this way, cyberbullying happens, harassment happens, revenge porn takes place, toxic place, stalking happens. These are the methods that digital tools, social media is weaponized in order to harass a person. No matter it might be a man or a woman, it might be done by a man against a man or woman against a woman. It's a gender neutral term. So moving on to next slide, this tech facilitated gender-based violence, when you look at in the context, happens in platforms, and we also see that this is happening in platforms that you don't have control whatsoever. Now I have listed down to you some existing literature that this does not happen only in Sri Lanka, not only in Asia. This happens in Arab states also. And also this takes place in sub-Saharan Africa also. So you see, this is a universal concept. However, aftermath of the COVID-19 and also during the COVID-19, because people were extremely isolated, it's a misery that the very connective tool of social media, which is ought to be something connecting people during the pandemic, became a tool against a person. So what has happened was, due to that, lot of people suffer. Also, gender-based violence happened place increased during COVID-19 pandemic and aftermath because of the utilization of digital tools. And also we see different countries, as I mentioned before, that this is taking place, and also this also impact marginalized group. Let's move on to the next slide, please. Okay, now why do they use digital platforms? Now, the example I took before, when you're crossing a road, a person might be asking, where are you going? But now in the digital platforms, you don't have the risk of looking at your own face. A person will use a pseudo account, an anonymous account, use a VPN, and do this. So anonymity is one reason, because you can escape detection. Also, it has a wider reach. Soon as you upload it, being the perpetrator, you might get a lot of views. People will text you asking, can I get the link to this? Likewise. And also low risk consequences. You don't have the fear of you being going and getting prosecuted. You don't have the fear of that you will be the person who access. And also other thing is, it's easily accessible. You go to the site and you watch it. You just open the WhatsApp and you watch the video. And control and power, the last element is also that it's dominated, it's used by the perpetrators and dominate the victims online presence. And also what they do is they isolate them and their support networks. Let's move on to the next slide, please. Okay, now I mention why they choose online platforms, the advantages that they perceive, and why it happens. What are the root causes behind? Why do this happen? One thing is cultural norms and patriarchy. Women are perceived as inferior and subordinate, and men, they are presumed to have the upper hand. And the other thing is objectification of women. Now, for an example, this we can look in this aspect. If you wear something provocative or people perceive as provocative, then the problems come, why did you wear that? That's why people looked at you in that way. So objectification taken place. This is not the way you're supposed to wear it. That is, you are being accused and you are being re-victimized due to that. That's another example. And also, we see social media usage. Is it regulated? Do we have control over? No. Honestly speaking, because of the limited oversight, and social media allows abusive behavior, and it takes no control over, and you feel extremely helpless. And also popularity of social media. These platforms are known to take reach. Influencers utilizes it. Anonymity safeguards the perpetrators. Another root cause is workplace issues. We see workplace sexual harassment. For an example, women faces it a lot. It extended to digital realm. It's not only in the workplace culture. Sometimes it happens in the social media, which is intangible scope. And also we see the misuse of work tools. Employees may misuse digital tools. For an example, workplace social media groups likewise and harass one another. It might not be your official group. It might be among your friends. They will utilize it in a negative way. Finally, it can be power imbalances. Why? When you look at a hierarchical structure, how power is balanced between people are different. Let's move on to the next slide, please. Okay, I think she's facing a. Okay, thank you, Miss Telem. Okay, and now she has again. Thank you so much. And we also see some other reasons as well. As you see, lack of literacy. This is one of the most major problems because we see lack of legal information, political literacy have caused people to resort to the access to post content, to share content, to verify content, to modify content without their knowledge. Sometimes they do not know whether it's true or not, they believe it. So, social media is in fact utilized as a tool which, without literacy, perpetrators may see it as heaven because they are unaware of legal and moral implications. They utilize it for their gain. What happens? So victims are unaware legally. What are my rights? I can speak really on behalf of it. My security. Why am I not reporting it? Generous public may also have situations such as society's lack of understanding on tech-based gender-based violence can also result in downplaying its impact in dismissing it. There are also cultural barriers. This is known by most of us. What is that? If something goes wrong, if something happens to you, you're very scared of talking about it, speaking about it. You have the shame and the stigma that the society might judge you. You have the family pressure in the conservative culture. If I go and open up and tell this has happened to me, how would they retaliate? And you do not actually believe the lack of trust. You have a lack of trust in the authority because when you go and complain to a person, that person will tell you, okay, tell me what happened. So you tell to that person, and then you will be directed to a women police constable. Now the women police constable will ask you what happened. Now again you tell the same story. Then you will be taken to a judicial medical officer. Then you will be stating the same story. Then you will be taken to courts. Then the opposing counsel will question you. Now this has become a vicious cycle. So you do not want to really go and like allow yourself to be questioned. Another thing is this evolving technology and new threats. For an example, there are deep fakes, spyware, AI driven apps which actually will falsify the content and make it believable, and you will be the victim of it if it is your image, but it's not your doing. And also encrypted messaging, while beneficial, it's extremely good for your privacy, but in encrypted platforms you are vulnerable to exploitation. It's like a double-edged sword. And the other thing is normalization of online misconduct. We see this it troll culture. Now we saw a recent incident involving a people, and when we look at the comment section, people will like, can you share the link with me? I want to see it. What sort of AI this is? Look at the questions people ask. How sad it is. And also we see psychological factors of perpetrators. Now this is the most uh, pathetic thing. You see, why they do this is very questionable. They might do this to seek thrill. Why they will do it? To gain control. So you feel that this a person will be begging to take it down. It may be for revenge or retaliation. It might be your ex-girlfriend or ex-boyfriend now misusing it. It can also be peer pressure. Shall we move on to the next slide, please? Okay, now what are the consequences of online gender-based violence in Sri Lanka? This is not only in Sri Lanka, in other countries as well. This is the same predicament. One thing is the emotional and psychological impact. When you undergo such a hard phase in your life, you feel anxiety, depression. Sometimes it might lead for post-traumatic stress disorder. As a result of online harassment, the cyberbullying and threats, you will remain silent. It happens. And also it affects your reputation. Nobody can disregard it because it's a part and parcel of you. You will feel humiliated because when you go out, you have the fear of people recognizing you. And also we see escalation of physical violence. Why? Perpetrators may escalate the online threats to offline violence also. They might tell, I will come and visit you. And also then you have to undergo legal consequences. Yes, there are acts, but there are limitations, but there are procedural lapses. So those are the consequences. Shall we move to the next slide, please? Okay, now why men and why women? Previous slide. Now you see why this happened for women, but when we look at it that way, on the other hand, we can see why does this happen to men. Now, why this happened for women? Now, when you just Google it, why this happened for women, baby? Women are perceived subordinate. So it's very obvious that you will be subjected to this situation. And sexual violence among women are disproportionately targeted by sexualized online violence. Most of the times, do you see or do you hear matters such as a video of a boyfriend is leaked? Oh, and also when we look at women, most of the time the woman or the girl is being blamed for it. Why did you send such an image? Why did you allow yourself to happen likewise? So what would happen to the victim is victim will lose trust and will not open up because of the lack of support system. But when you look at on the other hand, why men? Now this is less discussed when particularly those are LGBTQ men. They are, as I mentioned you in the first slide, they are gender-based violence, right? It's sometimes you might be a man, you perceive yourself as a woman, so you will face it because you are belonging to the LGBT community. And there are also some societal expectations. Men who show vulnerability are perceived to be defining masculine ideas. Men are not allowed to cry, and there are underreported victimhood of men. Now when you look at the penal code, it's always from man against a woman. You see, by terminology itself, there's a lacuna. So, due to these reasons, there are few measures that we can take. A call for action. Shall we move on to the next slide, please? One thing is call for action. I have mentioned it in the top and again. Why? The thing is advocacy. Just like IYAP is doing now, it is educating the community, calling for action, standing with people who are vulnerable. Another matter is raising awareness. Why? A lot of people are unaware of it. They do not know how to use a digital tool. They do not know their rights. They are unaware about their rights, duties, responsibilities, empathy towards one another. One thing is they lack support systems. Now, if this happens to me, I should have an environment that I can go and actually raise this concern and tell it to my parents so they will be helpful to me. And also, we see workplace policies. Now, if there's a zero tolerance policy for verbal abuse itself, it will actually set the precedent and not allow such as consequences. And another thing is media ethics. Now, for an example, when you look at media ethics, we can see not to criticize, engage in constructive criticism. Just because media is having a leash and they are allowed to, they are given a information space to battle, yes, there are things that they should abide by. And the final but most important point is digital governance, which means these digital domains should also be subjected to governance, regulation. I'm not talking about censorship. It is about being literate and having awareness of what you are doing. Okay, thank you very much. This brings us to the Q&A session. I would like to briefly thank IYAP and also Ms. Nelum, more importantly, Diniti for mediating this session. Waiting for Q&A and sorry that I had to off the video. Wi-Fi is going on and off. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Ms. Charani, for that enlightening presentation. I'm sure here the people learned about the diverse natures. I think the main factor I kind of grappled was everything's anonymous. We don't know when it's coming. So we have to be very vigilant as to what we are doing and what we are experiencing. So thank you for letting us know about how the regulations are, how we should react, how we should respond, and how personally it is quite hard to be confronting about it, right? When we face the issue, why it's so culture and it's just impossible to come into take an action. So I would now like to bring a few questions to Ms. Charani, and then we'll open the floor to the audience and to hear about their opinions and their questions as well. So I just want to have one question moving around. So you emphasize the importance of digital literacy in addressing online harassment. So we would like to know what strategies can be implemented to bridge the digital literacy gap, especially for women, for marginalized groups in developing nations like Sri Lanka, let's say.
Okay, so digital literacy is basically you are having awareness on the domains that you are utilizing. That means you should be able to know the purpose of it and constructively engage in it. So it's not just using social media. It's something like this. Now, when you use Facebook, you see sometimes our parents or in some generations grandparents, they find it very believable. You see there's a cyclone hitting and everybody is going to die today, so they are very much like, very convinced about it. But if they going and fact checking it, are they going and fact verifying it? So it's just like this. You hear someone telling bad about me. So if it was me, what I would do is I'll go for that person and ask, why did you say so? And that person will name a person. I'll go to that person and ask, why did you say so? That is the same thing that you have to bring into the digital domain. You go to the source, click it. But by this way, the marginalized groups, name it, maybe a man or a woman, should be able to fact verify, fact check, and stand up for themselves. They should make a substantial claim. So it's not about training or you're undergoing rigorous practice. It's basics. When you are using it, you are getting accountability. When you are using it, you know what you are doing. It's just like you're ticking. It's very sad now when you like install an app. You see a lot of statements coming. I hereby agree to this and that, and we are not reading it. We click it. When you go to a bank, we are getting a form. Sometimes a bank close will be to seize the card when you're going overseas. You take it. How many of us read it? That's the point. When we are utilizing an app, when we are giving cookie preferences, we should have the idea what we are allowing, what we are bringing, what we are embracing. So that's basic. You have to read it. You have to question it. You have to advocate it. If you do not know, you can ask from someone. Yes, less advantaged, marginalized groups find it significantly arduous to do that. And adding the burden, there's digital divide. If something like that happens to them, they'll get to know after ages sometimes. So that's very pathetic. For that, digital literate education and access to tools and giving them substantial knowledge how to utilize them is extremely imperative.
Thank you for pointing out that, Ms. Charani. I think it's very important for people to fact check, like you said. That's not something I see in the elderly community, or rather people who have not used social media or any sort of platform for too long. They tend to be too gullible to accept everything that they see. So I think that's a very good point that you said, and this is something that we can take back and tell people before spreading or before posting something. Fact check. Thank you, Mr. Aaron, for that. And yeah, I just want to, since we spoke a little bit about digital governance, and what do you see, what are the key gaps in the current policies? You just mentioned a little bit about the acts and everything as well, that allow gender-based violence to persist online. And how can we maybe address those things, address those issues through a legislative reform? How is it possible?
Yes, digital governance, as I mentioned, is about governance. It's about regulation. It's not about censorship, because we are a democratic country. But there are things like you have to balance your individual goals with collective goals. If what you do affects a considerable amount of society, then there's a huge problem. That's why normally rules are there. There's freedom of expression, but it's curtailed under national security. Likewise, accountability is extremely important. In digital governance, government and also international best practices will in fact help to regulate content which do not abide by humanity, which is not acceptable in education wise, moral wise. If it actually threatens somebody else, there should be a threshold to take it up. Just like community standards, we see when we look at community standard, you can report it. Now those are basics. You see an image, you can report it and telling impersonating me. So these are community automated guidelines. What I'm trying to say is that actually this should actually be part and parcel of proceeding, because in our Computer Crimes Act there's a plethora of law. Even if you access from another country, you can held accountable. But this is not actually practiced. One thing is, this is not brought into attention, and it's very, it's a rigorous procedure. Why bother? Just report it. What if honestly, there was a time in my life, if my one of my friend is undergoing some situation like that, I would have told, why are you getting bothered? Ask 10, 15 people to report it, it will go down. But now I'm different. I'm like, no, you have to speak for it. You have to see the person who did it to you. So digital governance is striking a balance between innovation and also innovation as well as the right based structure. So by that you can control you. It's not according to your whims and fancies. You cannot play with a person's fear. You should strike a balance between what is right and what is wrong. You have to always side with what is moral and what is right, and a victim should not be judged. Victim should have a way out for protection.
I mean, just this, since you said the victim should have a way out,
Yeah.
curious to know on how do you think, or rather, maybe our audience here might not know, what do you think are the best ways for the out pathways for any person who, let's say, gets into these kind of sticky situations where they come across gender-based violence happening? What would you think is the, on your opinion, based on your opinion, what do you think is the best thing that they can do
As a
in those
victim.
kind of situations? As a
Yes.
person, yeah, as a victim.
Yes. Yeah, as a victim, one thing is, you should, like, without a question, there should be a support system, a best friend or someone that you can go and actually speak up to. That's what we call unpaid therapy. You see, that is something very much important, and that such information should always be confidential. You can tell the story truly. These are basics. These are not actually part and parcel of laws. These are common human instincts. And also, then you should be able to go and lodge it for authorities. If it comes out after divulging it to a loyal person, you can go and tell it to authorities. But as I mentioned in the presentation, we saw there are a lot of lapses that you will be re-victimized and all. So then you should be allowed to go to procedural other mechanisms. For an example, there's Legal Aid Commission. There's suicide prevention hotline in Sri Lanka. There's also helplines in Sri Lanka. There's a mental health institute in Sri Lanka. These networks, these mobile networks do not cost you a single penny. It's just calling and telling. It's anonymous. They do not record it. So what IYAP is doing now, and what the question you actually ask is, this is advocacy. If a person is unaware of it, this is something that they can actually do.
Definitely. I think these points that you just told, I think we all should point on and keep that we have to have a self-help environment. We have to have somebody that we could speak to if you're going through something. And also to understand the fact that also, like you mentioned, that we have places that we can go to, and we are not alone, basically. I think those pointers, I think, Ms. Charan, is very important for all of us. And I'm really thankful about why you mentioned that. I think that's very timely. Thank you very much for that knowledge of yours. So just a final question I would like to know from you. If you could implement one actionable step tomorrow to reduce online harassment, what could it be and why? As a youth or as a person, but what could we do? How could they do it? Or what step should we take?
Okay, it's very important, yet extremely hard. You say, but it's very timely. What you mentioned. One thing I really wish that if we can put into practice, will be holding people who do this action and conspirators, aiders, abettors accountable. Maybe legally, maybe by your support system, maybe by your confidant. If you can hold them accountable, that would be marvelous. It will set a precedent so nobody else will do it.
accountability, amazing. Just that one fact that you just said, I think that is a thought-provoking word that you just used here. And I think all of us here, we have to be like that as well. So thank you very much for the pointers that you mentioned. So I think your knowledge and what you shared, I think we have all come into a point where we're thinking so much and what we are expressing our opinions and what we're experiencing online. So we now have a few minutes also to take questions from the audience. So I'm sure many of us have questions here. So I would like everyone here to not feel, limited. Just raise your questions. Yeah, we have questions coming in.